Thanks for listening to KATH 910 AM Frisco, Dallas, Fort Worth on the Guadalupe Radio Network in North Texas. Catholic radio for your soul. Heard also at grnonline.com and on your smartphone. Welcome to A Life Lived Joyfully, brought to you by the Guadalupe Radio Network. Join us as we explore the call to holiness and the life of virtue. Here's your host, Monsignor Charles Pope.
And it is I, speaking to you from Washington, D.C. today. And, I want to do some items in the news with you and try to give you some Catholic perspective on them. Four items today we'll take a look at. If there's time, maybe we'll grab another one. But I want to talk about a Kentucky court, a district court, it was not just for Kentucky, 6 other states, has been, they blocked the Biden administration's Title IX changes and talked about that again from a Catholic point of view, why that's a good decision. There's an emerging, as they say, thing about this whole question of surrogacy and its connection. There's a horrible bill that just went through the Massachusetts state legislature, and it basically allows a woman to sell her baby. And this has been, largely illegal up until now. So we'll take a look at that story. Also, over in Stubenville, Bishop Bradley, who was sort of the administrator there, he's out and he's been replaced. And we'll talk a little bit about that, what it means. There's a very difficult thing going on in Stubenville about whether that diocese should be merged with the neighboring diocese of Columbus. So we'll take a look at that as well. And then finally, there's a so-called leftist Christian group that is circulating a petition that takes objection to Judge Aloitos arguing that this nation needs to become more godly. So, the word godliness bothered them. It's a strange thing that a Christian group, or they call themselves Christian, would be troubled by wishing that America would become, have greater godliness. So we'll look at that as well. So here we are. Let's take a look now at this first issue. Title IX was a law that was passed. Some 20 years ago that was trying to help women's sports have the same kind of financial support from colleges and all that some of the men's sports did. And even at the time, it was a bit controversial. But at the end of the day, it's been with us for a long time. And now the Biden administration has wanted to say that sex is not, it can also include gender. So men who, quote, identify as women, unquote, could now qualify for Title IX, recognition. Well, among other things, the district court here, a federal district court, threw out that decision and protects states from the Biden administration trying to enforce these new aspects of Title IX. That's good news for us. Let me give you some of the details here. On June 17th, Chief Judge Danny Reeves of the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Kentucky issued a preliminary injunction in a ruling on state of Tennessee versus Cordona and so on. It temporarily stops the Biden administration's new interpretations of Title IX from being implemented for, among other states, or in 4 other states as well as Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Idaho, and Montana. So the District of Education, the Department of Education, Federal Department of Education, had announced this pro-LBGT, I guess with the emphasis on T, rewrite of Title IX. And they were trying to force the entire country, all the states, to change the way Title IX is interpreted. So instead of protecting young girls, the Title IX changes would redefine sex, in quotes, the term sex, to include gender identity, which then would allow each individual to define their sex as an individual sense of their gender, right? Again, we've seen what that's caused. It's the the Leah Thomas stuff, all that sort of stuff that we've been having to endure. All right. So the ruling throws this pressure to do this. It throws it out. Doesn't require states to do this. And the ruling of the judges of the judge in the decision said that despite society's enduring recognition of biological differences between the sexes, as well as an individual's basic right to bodily privacy, that the new rule seems to be mandating that schools permit biological men into women's intimate spaces and women into men's within the educational environment based entirely on a person's subjective gender identity. It goes on to say this is an inescapable conclusion based on the foregoing discussion that the Department of Education has effectively ignored the concerns of parents, teachers, and students who believe that the rule endangers basic privacy and safety interests. And I'll say, again, it is unconscionable that we've come to a place in our country where some people think that young men just say, "I'm feeling like a woman," and they go into the into the women's restroom, but even more so into the locker room, and then they start participating in women's sport. It is absolute. How did we get here? You see, and of course, a lot of us wonder, And I can just say that it all piles on after a while. All these premises, well, sex is just about fun, and it's not about having children, and sexual complementarity isn't that important after all, because sex isn't really about having children, and on and on. And it's just a slippery slope that slides down into this mess that we're in now. Who's really to say what's male or female anyway? And, all of these things come from this sort of complete sexual revolution that wanted to redefine the act of having sex and where and when it would be tolerated, to now just simply redefining sex. That is whatever a person says they want it to be, and that is not true. Now we'll look at some Catholic aspects of this teaching in a moment, but a little more about the ruling. Again, the judge pointed out the Department of Education simply ignored the testimony of many people who were concerned about this, and goes on. The ruling added that educators would likely have been required to use students' preferred pronouns. So this is a free speech issue now. So the ruling again added that educators, according to this, would likely be required to use the students' preferred pronouns, regardless of whether doing so conflicts with the educator's moral beliefs or religious beliefs. In other words, this rule would compel speech and engage in viewpoint discrimination. And he said in the ruling that's impermissible. It called the Title IX rewrite as arbitrary and capricious, and that the state, or the administration in this case, did not provide a reasonable explanation for making these changes. And that's interesting that they say that. People say, sometimes people, just because people are demanding it, they should do it, you see. I think that we've got to be aware that the number of people who are really transgender, it's got to be tiny compared to the number of us who are pretty clear about one of the most obvious things in our life, whether we're male or female. All right. But again, there's a sense today that just because a group's demanding something, everyone needs to move over and make room for it. And no matter that we've always agreed what it meant to be male or female, all the way up until about 5 minutes ago in our culture and in human history, suddenly, all of a sudden, all of us have to say, "Oh no, we were wrong all along," and just make all these adjustments, to the point of letting men go into women's locker rooms. I mean, this is a form of real and not just collective insanity. If we all go along with this, we've got to stop this. Now, by the way, Europe's a little ahead of us in this. There's a lot of things going on in Europe now where this is now being pushed back pretty hard, especially these so-called surgeries and things on minors to create physical differences on their externals of their body and mutilate the genitals, so to speak. That is now being severely pushed back, and I think it's going to eventually get here to the United States. We're going to wake up from this long nightmare about this topic soon enough, and I'm happy to see that Europe, which usually gets a little ahead of us in these cultural things, is kind of coming back to its senses. Let's hope and pray. It goes on to say, finally, just a couple more things, and I'll talk a little bit about some Catholic teaching here. Notably, the Department of Education does not provide sufficient explanation for leaving the regulations in place that conflict with the new gender identity mandate, nor does it meaningfully respond to commentators' concerns regarding risk or posed to student and faculty safety. All right. It goes just a commentary here from the article. The writer isn't identified, but this would jeopardize half a century of landmark protections for women, violate the First Amendment, and ignore the clear text of Title IX law passed by Congress. All right. Actually, that was written by the judge, so the rule should never have been issued in the first place. Pretty strong ruling. Now, of course, it's going to be appealed, of course, and as I say, these things will have to work their way through the court system. However, this decision is similar to another decision that affects a lot of other states. So a good number of states are no longer going to be required to be pressured to go along with these decisions by the Biden administration in this matter. I certainly want to know what you will have to say. I'm looking forward to maybe hearing some calls. We'll give you the number in a few moments, but a few Catholic thoughts about this. Because I don't want to just comment on the news as some dude. You don't care what I think about the news, but as a Catholic priest and as a believer in Jesus Christ, I want to say, first of all, and I've talked about this issue before, but it always has to bear repeating because they're just going to keep pushing. But we cannot simply redefine reality. Reality is something that we go out to meet. And this is, by the way, the constant perspective of the church in terms of what we call the natural law. And the natural law is something always been respected by the Catholic Church, going all the way back to St. Paul in Romans chapter 1, when he spoke about how God's will can clearly be discerned in the things that he's made and the way he's made them. And it goes from there. Now, the idea of what we come to call it the natural law, which is not just the law of nature, but is what our own mind can look at what nature is giving or what the nature of things and draw certain conclusions from them, not just arbitrary, but clear and certain conclusions based on the way things are made. These things are meant to be together. These are not. This works well. This doesn't work well, and so on. Stepping out of a third floor window or balcony doesn't do too good. This is a very discernibly true in terms of just observing the nature of this world and the way things work. So again, the first thing we say is that our understanding of the natural law goes all the way back, really into the Old Testament as well. The whole wisdom tradition is that creation is not just dumbly here, that it speaks to us. It's a revelation from God. And the way God makes things, he's teaching us something about himself, about us, about the order of things. God is the book of creation. We've got the book of the Bible, but we've also got what we've come to sometimes call the book of creation. And St. Paul insists, therefore, the Gentiles who didn't have the Old Testament scriptures were without excuse for some of the foolishness they were engaging in. And so again, this is the first thing we, as Catholics, this is a complete violation of the natural law, which we see now. Secondly, it is very, very clear that God has made us, you and I, individually in a certain way. I want to read to you a quote from Isaiah chapter 45 and verse 9. It says here, woe to those. When God says woe, you better pay attention. See, woe to those who quarrel with their maker, those who are nothing but potsherds among potsherds on the ground. Does the clay say to the potter, what are you making? Can you say, well, the potter has no hands? Or can woe to him who says to his father, what have you begotten? Or to his mother, what have you brought forth? You see, and yet this is almost exactly what's being said by this so-called transgender movement, shaking their fist at the way they came from the hand of God, male or female. And saying in effect to their maker, and not just their father or mother in this case, but the real Father of heaven, why did you make me thus? Throwing back into the Father's face what he has made. Terrible. It's a terrible sin when you think about it. It's a kind of a blasphemy. You screwed up, God. You didn't. Now you say, well, they don't believe in God. Well, but you see, we do. And we have to get people back into the business of things. There are just some things we have to accept from the hand of God. And we have to be clear on that. Even if they don't want to be anymore, we have to be clear on that. Now, the last aspect of Catholic teaching on this matter is that this part where it says that it compels speech, so that the Title IX would then require teachers, coaches, others to refer to the person by the pronouns they demand, even though it's very clear that, let's say, Leah Thomas is not a woman. He's not a woman. I don't care how many times he says, yes, I am. He's not a woman. He's biologically a male, and that's all that matters when it comes to sex. He is a man. Now, what he's asking me, in fact, insisting, and he and others like them, or this rule would compel my speech to say, oh, I have to lie and pretend that he is actually a woman, or in some cases, a woman is actually a man. Look, the idea of Leah Thomas competing in women's sports isn't wrong just because it's unfair. It is wrong because it's a lie. And there's nothing that unravels human relationships more than lying. When we just lie, even right to each other's face. It is a terrible, terrible thing. We cannot have community when everything is a stitch of lies. Okay, we'll come back after the break and we'll wrap this up and talk about another topic about surrogacy.
I'd known about the station for a long time, but I have to confess I never tuned in. Perhaps I was biased. But then that changed, actually. Once I started listening, I kept the dial where it was at. I like Teresa Tomeo and Al Kressner. I just like their personalities. Call to Communion with Dr. Dave Anders and More to Life with Pop Checks. I really, really love the show. I've learned a lot. But also, I really like that there's prayers interspersed. I get a lot more praying done in the day that I wouldn't otherwise. We want to support the radio station for sure.
The Guadalupe Radio Network, Catholic Radio. Radio for your soul.
Hey Donnie, what are the two most important things we receive at Mass?
The Christmas scripture.
That's right. All right, one more. Who loves you the most?
Jesus.
That's right.
Mary.
That's right. They love us too. If you don't educate your children in the faith, who will? Educate yourself and your family by listening daily to the Guadalupe Radio Network, and make sure to get the GRN app by logging online to grnonline.com.
Hey y'all, Sarah Soto here. What a fantastic journey it's been with you on Life Lived Joyfully. Now we are giving it a totally new, how the kids say, vibe, and it's called The Quest. Beginning on the feast of the Nativity of St. John the Baptist, we'll be with you in the same time slot, 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern. That's The Quest. Join us on this pilgrimage of faith starting June 24th at 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern. We can't wait for you to join us.
Welcome back to A Life Lived Joyfully on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Give us a call. The lines are open at 877-757-9424. That's 877-757-9424.
And we are back. And so again, we're speaking again about the Kentucky District Court ruling against the Biden administration's Title IX requirements, and rightfully so, and why this is true, not just because you might you have a political point of view or something, but just it's wrong from a Catholic point of view to compel speech, to force me to lie to somebody. You're telling me I have to lie and call you a woman or use pronouns. You're compelling speech, and I find lying immoral. Okay? Lying is a sin, and when I know that I've done it, I go to confession. And for you to compel me to lie, and to lie to me, is not something that we Catholics can and should ever support. Now, another thing that is wrong again is that, can the pot say to its the potter, why did you make me thus? Can woe to him who disputes with his maker. And this is what we find in this kind of I was born in the wrong body, so-called transgender movement. And so these are the things that I just want to say as these things come up in the news. Although I've talked about some of these issues before, it's good to point them out again. And because they're going to keep coming back with these things and until we just finally say and resist long enough. So when it comes up in the news, it's important to talk about it. So our little quest for the truth here is to not just hear the news and react on a political basis about something, or how we just have personal opinions, but as a Catholic, what does the church say or teach or think about these things, you see? All right. Number one, lying is wrong. Number two, God is our maker. and we are under his authority, and he chooses whether we be things like white or black or male or female or, these different things. Okay. So this is what God has done. Well, speaking of toying around with nature and things, a great author that I've talked a lot about, and I keep saying I want to have her on the show, and we'll get her on here eventually, but Carrie Gress has written an article, and the title of it is What a Tangled Web We Weave Because Gay People Cannot Conceive. There is a bill that went through the Massachusetts legislature that is just astonishing to me, and wait till you hear the number of the vote in a moment, but the bill would facilitate the sale of babies, and is making its way through the Massachusetts legislature. Okay, now, back in 2015, when the United States Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage nationwide, it was probably only a matter of time before a lot of other things, kind of began to melt down. Everything from polygamy, or they like to call it polyamory, and different things that are now pushing through for their, they want to have their quote marriages, unquote, recognized, 2, 3 people, 4 people getting married, we used to just call it polygamy, and that they want to call it polyamory and different things like that. So as I say, it's for all of us to say, well, all right, but the biblical word is polygamy. Now, but we also see now a huge jump in the numbers of surrogacy, people wanting a woman to carry a child for them, who is either not the natural mother of the child in any way, or is the natural mother, but will then surrender the baby upon birth. All right. And so surrogacy has become a booming industry, she writes, worldwide for LGBTQ plus couples, with just a handful of states limiting the surrogacy's use. The technology developed in an altruistic way was to help married women who were having trouble with fertility to try to attain pregnancies. But even there, the Catholic Church, we've had some troubles with the way even that's done in that kind of a context, where we turn the whole conception of a child into a laboratory thing, and a kind of for a price. It's no longer the conception of a human being in the proper marital act. And it's once again, a kind of a rejection. If a couple's infertile, there may be reasons that God has for that, but by gosh, we're not going to accept that, and we're going to try to overrule and go around it. So there's a lot of problems that the church has. We talked more about that, but let's stay with just the issue as defined here, surrogacy, with now this bill about allowing women to sell their babies. Many states now have expanded surrogacy to allow it for any reason. So it's outside of marriage, the couple's not necessarily married, and so on. They've created a kind of a rent-a-womb industry, she says, in which women are handsomely compensated for the use of their reproductive abilities. Some women are paid, according to this website that she cites, I'm not going to mention it here on the air, but it offers up to $68,000 for first-time surrogates, with additional benefits of up to $35,000. So close to a good $80,000 to $90,000 for the 9 months. Now, this week, this is astonishing. This week, the Massachusetts House of Representatives took a huge and unprecedented step toward further chaos. It unanimously passed a bill, 156-0, that would help mothers sell their children. The Senate will consider it next, but the schedule is not determined yet for the Senate there in Massachusetts. Now, again, it's never been. Let me read. She says it better. So I'm quoting again from her article. More troubling still, she says, yes, it gets worse. The bill allows for a cash transaction to be made after a woman has become pregnant, allowing her then to auction off her child to the highest bidder, as long as the agreement is cemented before the child is born. Okay, so that's that bill went through. It was unopposed. I'm sure an awful lot of those legislators up there are Catholic up in Massachusetts. So it's a terrible situation. The loose wording of the bill makes things even stickier. It says that the genetic surrogate is not entitled to any non-expense related compensation for acting as a surrogate if the child was not conceived by assisted reproduction. In other words, they had to go through IVF or some kind of a thing. Um, and but it's easy to imagine that a court could easily ratify an agreement if a woman had sex with a man instead of using artificial means. And this has been argued in an article in the Federalist magazine. The loose wording of the law could allow a woman to accept money in exchange for sex as long as she conceives and then relinquishes her parental rights, so that the father could raise the child in some other setting, thus combining both prostitution and child trafficking in one terrible bill. All right. And she goes on to comment, she says, fertility, or feminists have long derided women's fertility as an obstacle to their happiness. You can't work and it ties you down, having children, that kind of stuff. But in an ironic turn of events, fertility is now in demand. The inherent sterility of LGBTQ relationships, coupled with most people's overwhelmingly natural desire to parent, has created a new market. But this market won't help women become better women. It too will certainly steer them away from the deep love and the desire of motherhood. For the Parentage Equality Act offers yet another incentive for women to be terrible mothers, opening the legal door for them to become very well compensated human traffickers of their own children. Right. This is where we are today as a culture. You see, these things with surrogate motherhood, the church has always opposed these agreements, because again, you're going outside the marriage bonds. You're conceiving a child outside of marriage, even if you do it in a petri dish. It's not about the actual act of having the marital act. It involves sometimes what they do is they do the in vitro fertilization that we've talked about. And there's trouble with that because, again, many more embryos are fertilized, are going to be, now exist. They fertilize, let's say 5 or 6. They might find the most promising one and implant it in the womb of this, rent a womb of this mother. And the others are either discarded or put on ice, frozen. And that's a problem, to do that to human beings. At fertilization, that's a human being. And so the church opposes that. And then on top of that, having different men and women who are not married to each other involved in making babies, so to speak, is the other problem. Now, you see, God put 3 things together: having sex, having babies, and being married. They're supposed to be together. That's how God set it up. In the scriptures, he speaks to us of this. And obviously, it makes sense from the natural needs of a child, right? To have a stable father and mother stably present in their life, not just so they can have 2 parents, but so they can understand the masculine genius of being human and the feminine genius of being human. And to subject children to other situations is a terrible injustice against them. All right, they're not going to be raised in the environment and the way God set things forth for things to be done. So for Catholics, we need to oppose these things. And I know it gets a little kind of contorted and difficult to sort through all the IVF technologies and all these things, but just keep this in mind. Just keep these 3. God put 3 things together. 3 things: having sex, having babies, and being married. How about not in that order? How about being married, having sex, and having babies? They're all supposed to be together, but we have separated what God has joined. And we've done this now in manifold ways, just outright fornication and acts of adultery, but the surrogate motherhood, renting a womb, having sometimes it works like this: a woman just receives the embryo into her womb and implants, and she's not the biological mother, but she's carrying that child in her womb. Other times, her own egg is fertilized by someone who went to, pardon the expression, a sperm bank, and then that's implanted. So we have now a mixed parentage, a father who's not married to the woman. There's a child that's being born, but she's going to be well paid to let go of that child and let the father go off into whatever, a gay relationship or another marriage. Maybe he and his own wife can't conceive. And so all of this is breaking down what God needs for us to have together. And that this bill would have passed in a one-time Catholic state, and don't tell me that more than half of those legislators aren't Catholic, at least in name, that nobody seemed to have raised any questions, is a very astonishing thing to me. This is one other thing about the bill. It also officially gets rid of words like father and mother on birth certificates. I don't know, progenitor one, progenitor two, what are we going to do here? Party the first part, party the second part, again, all of this is so twisted, but you see, this is what happens when we walk away from God and we go down we end up in all these weird rabbit holes, because we're just simply ignoring the way God set things up. And I could make certain natural law arguments for this, but again, I'm speaking as a Catholic priest to Catholics, and I'm just going to tell you right now, if all this thing kind of overwhelms you with complexity, just at least remember, God put three things together that we should not divide: being married, having sex, and having babies. When we divide these, and people have sex outside of marriage, or people try to have babies outside of marriage, or to make marriage have nothing to do with children, that's what gay marriage comes from that. When we do all that, we end up with all this confusion and anger and oppositions, and we're in law courts, and we're all over the map with this stuff. So you see, God set up things. It's not hard. The biology of all this is pretty straightforward. And there are going to be times where there's a couple that wants a child and they can't. All right, we'll talk more about that on the other side of the break. We'll talk when we come back. See you after the break.
This is Life News Radio. I'm Jim Anderson. Live Action is reporting that Governor Jay Inslee wants Washington State to preempt the U.S. Supreme Court in an abortion case. At least that is the rhetoric. The Supreme Court is expected to rule whether a Biden administration rewrite of a Reagan-era law can compel Idaho hospitals to perform abortions despite Idaho's state abortion ban, vaguely inferring that this Idaho ban is a draconian problem for Washington State women. Governor Inslee says he will compel all Washington State hospitals to provide abortion. But the Idaho controversy is a creation of the White House rewrite, and trying to force even Catholic hospitals in Washington State will not solve any part of that controversy. This is Life News Radio.
The view, the accurate view of the human person, changes everything. The news you hear and see pertaining to the human person has the power to inform or misinform your opinions and what you do with the gift of life and what you allow your government to do. It's why we at this station offer news on the life issue. We hope you carefully assess what you hear, read, and view.
The National Right to Life Committee's Dave Andrusko is reminding voters that Democrat Party embrace of abortion, boundless abortion paid for by taxpayers, is extreme. Candidates campaign as if merely moderate on abortion and vote extreme on abortion when in office. Pro-life leaders are praising the largest Protestant denomination in the country for its opposition to in vitro fertilization. While Southern Baptists have opposed technology that disregards the sanctity of human life, this is their first clear statement against the practice of laboratory fertilization, selection for gestation, and the disposal of unsuitable embryos. For pro-life headlines delivered to your email address daily, sign up at lifenews.com. This has been Life News Radio.
Welcome back to A Life Lived Joyfully on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Give us a call. The lines are open at 877-757-9424. That's 877-757-9424.
All right, and we are back. And just to wrap up the whole in vitro fertilization and its relationship to the whole LGBTQ and that bill in Massachusetts, I think, look, we all are sympathetic to some couples who, for various reasons, they may not even know why, are not fertile. And but I have to say, sometimes in life, there's just not something you can do about it. And that we have to say, well, maybe what is God asking, or what is God maybe opening another door? Maybe it could be for adoption. There are a lot of, good adoption agencies that can pair up couples, even with infants. And so again, I think that we have to sometimes accept that God sometimes says no. And this insistence on, we're going to have it done one way or the other, and is not a very, Catholic approach. It's not just about this issue. It's about a lot of things in life. Sometimes it's just not, I'm never going to be a math genius. I could study for hours and hours. That's just not the kind of brain God gave me. I'm more literary, But again, you see the idea. Sometimes we just have to accept that I can't have everything I want all the time. And even if something as important as having a kid, it's understandable that some people want this. But to simply force the issue when God seems to be saying no after reasonable medical things that can be allowed. There are things that can enhance fertility, but don't not replace the Marriage Act. And fine. But if you start straying from that, we end up down these rabbit holes where we actually now have a bill in Massachusetts that will permit women to sell babies. It's never been permitted before. So again, and that in vitro opened the door to it because, well, if they have this arrangement ahead of time through in vitro, and okay, see, and that opened the door, and now it's just going to be wide open, where they can just outright either commit acts of prostitution and sell the babies, or they can do an awful lot of things that have never been permitted before, where children are just a commodity to be conceived and grown, if you will, in the womb and then sold away, possibly even to the highest bidder. Astonishing, shocking. 156-0. Unbelievable that it passed, that bill passed that strongly. All right. By the way, I also think a lot of Catholics haven't thought through, people in general haven't always thought through all the technical things of IVF, that how many people, for example, know that that most of the embryos conceived in that process are either discarded or frozen. That's something to think through. That's a form of abortion. Okay. All right. Well, now I want to move on to a topic that's more churchy, I guess you might say, regarding the Diocese of Stubenville. And good article today, or I guess maybe today or yesterday, in the Pillar. It's entitled "Bradley Out as Steubenville Administrator." The Diocese of Steubenville announced Friday that Bishop Paul Bradley has been replaced as diocesan apostolic minister and will be succeeded by Bishop Edward Loos of Kalamazoo, Michigan. The decision was framed in an archdiocesan announcement as a next step regarding the merger of the Steubenville Diocese with the Diocese of Columbus. But sources with knowledge of the announcement say that Bradley was only informed of the decision by the nuncio this week during the meeting in Louisville, and where the USCCB had a meeting. And the decision seemed to have come in response to Bradley's reservations regarding the prospect of merging the Steubenville Diocese with Columbus. He kind of, pardon the expression, he went native. He got there kind of as someone to transition them into this into this merger. And he said, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. This is this diocese has got a lot of vitality, and we have a pretty good priest to people ratio. It's a kind of a well-sized diocese. It's big enough to be managed, to flourish, and it's not so big as to be unmanageable where the bishop hardly knows most of his priests or even the people. In fact, I would argue, and this is where some people may have a point, it is a small diocese. It's always been relatively small. Even back in I think it was formed in 1945 or 1944, that's what it says here. There were 60,000 Catholics there at the time. Not many, especially in those days. And now there's about 30,000 Catholics in that diocese. So it is not a large diocese. But there's 86 priests there, which gives them a ratio of about one priest per, say, 330 people. All right. So it's a manageable thing. They say they've got enough priests. I don't know all the money issues and so on. So I'm not here to say, in my view, it should be able. But I'm just saying that the administrator there began, as he went there, he began to say, I wonder, he was listening to the people, and he was saying, maybe this isn't a good idea after all. And so some argue that's the reason he got pulled. And he himself said, well, I'm not leaving willingly. I didn't ask to leave, in other words. I guess that's the way he put it. He says he had not chosen to relinquish his role. So he was informed, you have been replaced. I think it's an arguable thing when a diocese is that small that maybe it should merge, but I don't know. The people of the diocese, according to the article here in the Pillar, the people kind of complained that they really weren't consulted. It was just sort of announced back in 2022 that there was likely going to be a merger, and this bishop went there. He was a retired bishop at the time, and he agreed to kind of go there and be the apostolic administrator and kind of oversee these things until the merger could be formalized. But again, the people have not felt included. Now, that's sometimes not a fair charge. Maybe maybe the church has tried to include them, but they have been resistant. I don't know. I just don't want to just take one side and say, see, the church hasn't been including them because they say so. And there may be, though, some legitimacy to that charge. And I think that one of the things that the people of God often say when there have to be parish closings or other types of parish mergers and things is that they just didn't really know that much about the difficulties and the trouble until it was too late. And so I think as a good model, we have a very good model in this diocese regarding school closures, which is also a very painful thing. But when they start to see that a school's in trouble, that there's some of the metrics you try to keep going when you have a Catholic school running, they start to see that it's edging in the wrong direction. They call a meeting 5 years out, let's say, from any possible closure. And they inform the people, the school community, as well as the parish or parishes that are part of that school. And they say, we got a problem and we want to work to fix it. And so they work with everything from publicity to, tightening up the administration, cutting some cost and these kinds of things. And they see if they can turn it around. And in some cases, they go off the warning list. But there's a process, you see. When there's trouble, we reach out, the diocese here reaches out to those schools and says, hey, some of the numbers don't look so hot here. And even if your parish can afford it right now, it's not good to have parish monies of over 25% being devoted to keeping a school open. Let's talk. Let's see what we can do to build a better model. And then after several years of discussion and working, if the numbers are still bad and they're getting even worse, then they make a mutual decision to close the school with this proviso. The diocese says, look, the buildings are really yours. They don't belong to us. If you want to keep them open and rent this building out to a charter school, or if you want to run a private Catholic school that's not affiliated with the diocese, you'll have to pay for it, but it is your building. Now, all we ask is that you don't allow things to be taught in there that aren't according to Catholic teaching. That makes sense, And so there's certain agreements made. So one of our parishes where the school was closed said, hey, we're going to go on our own. And they did. And so far, they've been doing all right. But in most cases, it's a mutual agreement to kind of say it's time we're hemorrhaging money, or there's just not enough people, and it just doesn't make sense to try to keep the building up or whatever for the school or the parish church or whatever. So it makes some sense, but it's a mutual agreement. And that's what I really like about the process. And thanks be to God, we haven't really had to close any of our parishes. We've sort of returned a couple of them to mission status, which means there's not a pastor living on site, but there's still mass said there. But I hope that we'll do the same thing with parishes. If we foresee that a parish needs to close because it's just not able to pay its bills and so on, far ahead of time, we'll call the people and say, look, these are your buildings and so on. So that's my model. It's not my model. It's the model we use here in the Archdiocese of Washington that I think is respectful. And everyone's part of the decision, right? And so with all that in mind, I think to some degree, at least according to them, the people of Stubenville don't think that they were really involved in the process. And they've been pushing back. And they claim parish and laity argue that the diocese has significantly more priests per capita than any other diocese in Ohio, and has a higher share of Catholics attending Mass than other Ohio dioceses. So they don't give the numbers here, but they say of the 30,000, they get higher percentages than the average. 17% are going to Mass. And that they had a lot of good process in the synodality process, etc. And it says the advocacy for their diocese was a partial success because the USCCB, which had been scheduled in November 22, to possibly set up the merger of the diocese, shelved the project. At least it was temporarily on hold. And so again, we have this has been going on, and then in September 2023, there were some allegations of this goes back before the current bishop that became the administrator, but the previous bishop had a vos estis investigation going on, And so he was removed and moved to another diocese while that investigation went on. And that's when Bradley came on board. And it says as he took the reins in Stubenville, he quickly garnered praise from the local clergy who said that he listened to them. He was attentive to their needs and didn't seem to regard an extinctive merger for the diocese as just a foregone conclusion. So he gave them some hope. And I didn't just come here to close this place, I came to love you and serve you is kind of the way they say he put it. So again, we have then everyone is emphasizing right now that no decision has yet been made, but the polling on Bishop Bradley seems to suggest that he wasn't on message. And we'll leave it at that. But I do hope that the church will be careful. I do understand that when the diocese is as small as 30,000 people, I mean, for heaven's sakes, some of our larger southern dioceses, some of the parishes are 20 and 30,000 members, let alone the diocese. But I can simply say that if it's working, great. And again, I'm the first to admit I don't have all the facts. I'm just looking at an article here from the Pillar. But let's pray for the people in Stubenville and that will all work out. And I'd certainly be interested in some of the things you think the phone message has been given out. But call about any of these issues and tell me what you think. So again, we'll see you on the other side of the break.
Hey y'all, Sarah Soto here. What a fantastic journey it's been with you on Life Lived Joyfully. Now we are giving it a totally new, how the kids say, vibe, and it's called The Quest. Beginning on the feast of the Nativity of St. John the Baptist, we'll be with you in the same time slot, 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern. That's The Quest. Join us on this pilgrimage of faith starting June 24th at 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern. We can't wait for you to join us.
So a neighbor who we've spoken to, just in greeting, but who I don't believe has ever spoken back to us, out of the blue, surprised us. One day we were getting the kids in the car for Mass and asked us if we were going to Mass. I was dumbstruck for about probably 10 seconds. It was great that we had an opportunity to share about our parish and that we were Catholic. Turned out she was Catholic too, and she assumed we were because of the bumper sticker on our car.
The Guadalupe Radio Network. Radio for your soul. Listen to The Spirit World with Debbie Georgiani and Adam Bly.
Demonic activity appears to be on the rise. I'm Debbie Georgiani, and I invite you to join Adam Bly and me this weekend for The Spirit World.
On The Spirit World, we offer a Catholic perspective on angels, demons, and how the spiritual and physical worlds interact.
Saturdays at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern on the Guadalupe Radio Network and other EWTN radio affiliates. Visit grnonline.com/spiritworld. Welcome back to A Life Lived Joyfully on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Give us a call. The lines are open at 877-757-9424. That's 877-757-9424.
Good, and we are back, and we're taking a look here at this some of these issues in the news. And I think we just finished up about the diocese in Stubenville. But I would also say that I want to take a look at one last story that's in the news. This is from the let's see, it's from the CV news feed. I guess that's the Catholic Voters news feed. But it says here, leftist Christian group circulates petition demanding Aloitos' resignation. Now, the group is called Faithful America. I guess I have to say I've never heard of them, but they describe themselves on their website. It says Faithful America calls itself, quote, the largest online community of Christians putting faith into action for love and social justice. Close quote. I can only just say I've not heard of them. Doesn't mean they're not big. I don't know. I just to let you know, they haven't hit my websites or my radar until now. So they have signed, it's just a petition. They have the right to have their point of view. But at the end of the day, they're asking for Justice Aloitos' resignation. It's kind of for an odd reason. At least a so-called Christian group, you wouldn't think they'd be upset about this. But it says here, Dear Justice Samuel Alito, it begins, as members of the Christian organization Faithful America, We are deeply disappointed by your recent comments agreeing that the United States should move to a place of godliness. Yeah, I'm okay. Why would a Christian group be upset about that? But they say, well, they claim that the trotting out the Christian labels for right-wing politics, which I didn't hear that in as they quoted Justice Alito's comments, but it says they claim that they are sick and tired of sitting by quietly while Jesus' message of good news is hijacked by the religious right to serve a hateful political agenda. Wow. So I guess I'm a little bit puzzling. Once again, I'm kind of, they call the Christian right. I don't know if I like that label. I'm trying to be Catholic, but let's just say I think it's too easily that people just slap the label hateful on something they just don't agree with. So here's the problem, I think, with this whole right-wing left thing, the left-wing thing in the whole structure of the Catholic setting is that the devil is he's not stupid, and he's been able to manipulate things in such a way that the most fundamental moral issues that admit of very few exceptions, if any, seem to be on one side of the aisle, the political aisle, and other issues which are important issues but admit of different approaches are on the left side of the aisle. Now, let's get some specifics. Abortion, up or down, and that's become largely the bailiwick of the right, the political right, Republican Party, what have you. Other issues like so-called gay marriage, although I don't think either party is really standing up for that one way or the other. But also, again, physician-assisted suicide, questions of the end of life issues as well as the beginning of life issues, and so on, and so on. All of these things tend to park on one aisle, whereas other issues, for example, care of the poor. Let me make a shout out here that God he cares an awful lot about how we treat the poor. He says a lot about it in the Bible. God is very concerned about how we treat the poor. But the problem is, I don't know of either party that's saying, no, we shouldn't help the poor. Heck with them. But I think it's more of a question of how do we help the poor, And so you see what I'm saying? You can agree with the principle. The question is, are big government programs the way, or more things that have more subsidiarity, more local things? Should not the first obligation be on families and churches and local communities before the federal government with large programs? I don't know. It's a debatable issue, about these kinds of things. And so what we try to see here is that, but the devil has sort of arranged this. And so, but I am not going to sit here by this and be criticized by this group for having a hateful agenda because I oppose abortion, or because I oppose physician-assisted suicide, or because I resist some of these non-biblical celebrations of human activities, sexual activities, primarily by the LGBTQIA plus community. I don't hold those things out of hatred. I have sincerely held religious beliefs rooted in the scriptures. I believe demonstrably so. And to accuse me or others like me who agree with me of just engaging in hate or what have you, and that isn't Jesus' agenda. Well, you're darn right. Hate is not Jesus' agenda, and I don't have it. Jesus' agenda was certainly the truth. He says, here's the problem. The light is coming to the world, but a lot of people prefer the darkness. And his very clearly stated teachings by himself and by his apostles, and also all the Old Testament teachings, are all being thrown in the docket today by the so-called left, including certain groups of Christians, mostly the old mainstream Protestant groups and some other groups, whatever this group, Faithful America. They apparently don't think that those biblical arguments are worthy of their belief, but I do. It has nothing to do with whether I hate people. I don't feel free to just say, well, God got that wrong. No, because God is love. Well, yeah, but love is not always about saying yes. Sometimes love is saying no. Daddy, I want a flamethrower for Christmas. No, son, that's not good for you. Okay, well, you hate me. Well, no, I don't hate you. I actually love you, you know? So you see, we have to, I think, resist this. But again, we have also, though, this is, they're very upset that, I think, because Alito is seen by them to be a conservative, but they forgot to note, according to this article, that they did not acknowledge that Alito, also at that same group, that meeting where he was quoted as saying America should move to a place of greater godliness. They failed that he noted, however, that the Supreme Court was not in a position to impose conservative values, or what have come to be called conservative values, on the country, and that justices are properly limited in their constitutional role. So again, I think he's very clear. He has no ability to impose. He's got to follow the law and interpret it as they see it written. And if there's problems or laws that need changing, that belongs to the legislature. So again, all I can say in all these things, though, is that I think it's just a funny and odd place that we find ourselves, that even certain Christian groups have so distanced themselves from the Word of God and what the church has always taught, not just for 2,000 years, but many of these teachings go back all the way 4,000 years into the past, all the way back through Genesis. And that somehow all of us are part of a hateful approach, and that Jesus wasn't into hate. Well, I'm not either. And I can say simply this, that I do feel an obligation, though, to say what Jesus actually said, not just what I think he should say, because I want him to belong to my political group. How about belong to Jesus first and let the issues fall where they may? And I think that's the goal for all of us, to be truly Catholic. I'm not pro-life because I'm a Republican. I'm not registered that way. I'm pro-life because I'm a Catholic. And so all of these are ways of saying that I think let's avoid the name calling and stuff like hate and stuff like that. And especially a Christian group accusing another Christian of doing something wrong by calling for a more godly nation is strange indeed. Well, it's been good to be with you today. We'll see you later on in the week, and we'll continue to talk about this great quest for truth that we have. Amen.
Transmitting the treasures of our Catholic faith to your radio every day. This is the Guadalupe Radio.